Dr. Jazz.
Cool that we found the time to do
Dr.
that.
Jazz.
Happy.
Yeah.
You know, the last time we saw each other, I thought like, man, shit, we should do that. We have so much in common, and you've played with so many musicians, and that I really love. And I checked my albums that I have, and I have you on a couple of albums that I really love. You know, by Gary Thomas and John D. Earth. I have you on two John D. Earth albums.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are fabulous, man. I just listened to them yesterday, and it's like, damn, this is some cool music.
There's yeah, those are actually, like I said, I was in the States, and I really had it as one of my things to do, to go say hello to John, but I wasn't able to do it, so I have to do it the next time. But he's such a fabulous musician.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get there, but I wanted to start this talk by I remember when we talked the last time, we talked a lot about literature, and you had a new project going on end of June, and it's kind of inspired by Percival Everett, who's like, I guess, one of your favorites. How did that inspire your music when you compose, or like how does literature interfere with your music or combine? What's the story there?
You know, I had sort of danced around that for a long time, and it was only with this Percival Everett that it really took root. I guess it started really back during the pandemic, when we were all locked in our homes, and I could go out and walk the dog, but basically I was at home. And so when everybody was asleep, I read, and I went through a lot of books, and I forgot about this Percival Everett book. It was like not even in the shelf; it was like on the side, and I pulled it out. Wow, I got it. So I put everything else aside, and I got onto that book. And the particular book was called The Trees,
Yep.
Percival Everett. And basically, in a nutshell, it's about the history of lynching in the United States. And I have to tell you, I read through that book, and it just kept me up at night just thinking about, the whole aspect of it. And his characters were just so vivid. And each character was so strong that each character suggested a melody. And I thought, well, I have to go with this, So there were like four particular characters that I portrayed musically during the concert. And right before the concert, I was invited to go to an art gallery and give a lecture on Juneteenth, which is, when Texas officially recognized the end of slavery.
Yeah.
And so before I did it, I asked the guy, I said, would you mind if I plug my concert? And he goes, no, man, go ahead and plug it as much as you want. So I think every 5 minutes I plug my concert. And true to form, a lot of those people showed up at the concert. One showed up in Vienna, and several showed up in Graz. And we were talking about that book, and it just never, it just has never left my psyche.
Yeah. It's funny, literature and jazz especially. I've spoken to so many guys. It kind of goes together, right?
Yeah.
More frequent, it's poetry. I mean, for me, it's poetry mostly. When I read a poem by someone, I'm like, shit, man, Robert Greeley. I'm like, damn.
Yeah.
And a rhythm comes in or whatever, and
yeah.
But it's an interesting connection that many jazz musicians have this parallel literature and music. I love that.
Speaking of Greeley, that's a great recording by Steve Swallow with one of my favorite drummers, Bob Moses, as you know, Moses is playing. But that's a really strong project.
Yeah. I've spoken with Steve about that, and he was like, he's been such a fan of Greeley's. And it's so funny to hear Steve, like the master bass player, talk about poetry and Greeley, and he's like so enthusiastic, even more than about music when he talks, which is funny, but yeah. But Howard, you've been to the States now, and I wanted to ask you. I never got the chance to ask you that in person, but like, what got you inspired for jazz? Actually, what did you have like an aha moment that you said, like, shit, I want to play this music? Did you hear like a specific record or?
You know, I think I was not unlike a lot of kids who, like, you know, running around in the 60s and 70s. Like, my first heroes really were, and playing in garage bands, my first heroes were James Brown and Hendrix. So, you know, I mean, if you could play the groove to Cold Sweat, you were like in, you know. But my dad, who really inspired my love of music initially, had all the jazz records. I mean, he had Monk's Dream and several, a Time Out, Dave Brubeck, and Giant Steps with Train, you know. So I had, and because he was listening to that stuff most nights, it just sort of absorbed it. So, you know, by day, I was, you know, hanging out with my friends and, you know, trying to cop all these licks, Hendrix and James Brown. But by night, I was like listening to his stuff. And this started really like age 7 or 8, you know. So by the time I got to music school, people started dropping the name Coltrane Giant Steps. I'm thinking, man, I already know that, you know, I've already checked it out. So he started it. Cannonball was a favorite, Nancy Wilson. I mean, all of the people who are our favorites, you know, he was checking that stuff out. And my dad never played a lick of music. He was just an avid listener, you know. So he was my initial contact. And I had a band director in high school who was all, other than being an excellent educator, he was a fantastic trumpet player, and he played in a couple of bands. He did all the Broadway shows in town. He got me my first gig, actually, playing a Broadway show. I was playing with my band director. And he was the one who further fanned the fire, you know, and inspired me to go to music school, which actually was the same school that he went to, you know. So then it just basically, it took off. But I went to school, I have to say, I went to school for classical music because they didn't have a jazz curriculum. And it was sort of the compromise with my parents. If you're going to study music, it should be classical, you know, to create a background. And I happened to fall in with a small group of improvisers, stand up most nights in the practice rooms jamming. And we were like bribing the night guard, you know, giving them cases of beer to check all the other rooms and come back to ours. And usually by the time he got back to our, you know, our end, the north end of the school, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we were all ready to go anyhow, you know, to get in line for that 9 o'clock class. Nowhere in the world I could keep up with that schedule now, but it worked its purpose during that time.
How did you then connect with the scene, with the players? I mean, we mentioned John D. Earth, and like, when did you start playing your first professional gigs? I also read like you had the pop side. Really curious about that, like some famous groups you played with, or
well, again, that was, you know, that was really like my beginnings, you know, playing that stuff. And of course, you know, my mom's church, I played. That was the first time playing drums was in my mom's church. You know, if you're gonna play drums, you're gonna play in the church. So I played in that, played certain programs, and did things. And when I got out of music school, I had two choices. I was thinking of going to Washington, D.C., which is a much bigger scene, or coming back home. So I remember when I graduated, my dad shook my hand with my right hand, and with the left hand, he presented me with the car payments to my car. And he said, son, it's all up to you now. So I really needed to work, and I needed to work fast. So I did substitute music teaching. I was a substitute teacher, and I did some private lessons, and I did, like I said, I did some garage band things, which turned into gigs. And that was the music that was really like allowing me to pay for my things, you know, what I needed to do. And so I kind of took a break from jazz, but then, you know, for me, I mean, it works for other people, but for me, I kind of got tired of playing beats, and I wanted to play the drums. which is, for me, there's a big difference. So I let that phase out, and I really got on the jazz scene. There was a guy, Jim Northcutt, who took me under his wing. His claim to fame was that he cut the hair of Charlie Parker in New York. He was like a barber. but this guy was like so knowledgeable about music. So he took me around. I went to jam sessions with my mom's blessings, and he took me to jam sessions, and eventually I sat in, and my name spread around, and I started, playing on the jazz scene, and all. So I was sort of going between living in Southeast Virginia, which is not that far from DC, and also going into DC playing. I think the first guy I played with was John Malachi, who played piano with Dizzy Gillespie, and I got on his circuit, and he recommended me for things, and started playing, and eventually that DC connection eventually led me to Andrew White.
Ah, okay.
That was that basically was the important cornerstone to fully convert me from being a local jazz player at home to playing with more international people, because I played with Andrew in New York, which was a story in and of itself, because I played at Lincoln Center. It was a jazz festival. And, Andrew, with his reputation of being a Coltrane scholar, a lot of saxophone players came out to that. In fact, Samo, I just saw a photo about 3 months ago, and somebody had taken a picture of Pharoah Sanders and his son Tomoki at that jazz festival. So they were looking at us, playing, which was heavy, because I love Pharoah,
Sure.
And for that matter, I love his son. I think his son is a fantastic player, But it was interesting looking at a photo of this guy, saxophone icon, looking at me, So it's interesting. But yeah, with Andrew, everything basically opened up, and I really started playing in New York more. And a lot of tours were really coming out of New York. I ended up playing with Ingrid Jensen and George Colligan.
Oh, that's why you connected with George. Okay.
Yeah. I did 2 records with him.
Yeah, I have those. Yeah.
And with Ingrid, 3 tours of Europe with her. And then through her sidemen, George Colligan, Mark Copeland, Reggie Johnson, Johannes Enders.
Yeah.
I played with. In fact, Johannes used her band to record a record that I did with Johannes called Bright Nights on India.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So that's, really Andrew was the catalyst to really uplifting me from a local status to more of an international scene, And it didn't hurt to flash his name when I came over to audition for the job in Graz, because Charlie McLean, the late Charlie McLean, certainly knew of Andrew, and Liebman had a lot of contact with Andrew. So it was Andrew White. Yeah.
Did you, when you played at the Lincoln Center, did you ever consider moving to New York, or did you live there for a longer time, or?
The answer is yes. I did consider moving there, but I'm leaving out some of my past history. I had a struggle. I had a struggle when I decided to play jazz, even on a local level, and I struggled. My home many times went without heating, and I practiced many times with a big coat on and a hat. Getting food was a struggle sometimes. In fact, I was homeless my rent, and it was a struggle. So I'm thinking, I'm hearing all these stories about musicians struggling in New York, and if I'm having this hard time at home, maybe I need to just stay at home for a while. So eventually, that's what I did, and I was basically just answering the phone of people from New York calling me at home. So I figured, well, I might as well just stay at home and live a fairly nice life. I do like to eat nice meals, and I like to buy newspapers, and I like to buy books. So I can do those things comfortably at home. Maybe I should just stay here, So basically, that's what I did.
Yeah. We mentioned John before, and I know I asked you once that there's this record, One Bright Glance, and you know, some of my favorite players there, like Marc Johnson, obviously, and John Abercrombie. It's basically the John Abercrombie trio without Peter Erskine and you on drums.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
But how did that record happen? And you know, playing with John and Mark, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how was that like?
Man, I still remember it to this day. Mark at the time was living in New York, and doing his things. He played with, as you know, Bill Evans, and then that kind of fell apart, and he was in New York, just playing, doing a lot of things. In fact, he was still with his first wife, Stephanie, and they had a little girl. Uh, Mark's roots started at North Texas State,
Mm-hmm.
and he wanted to figure out a way to get back to Texas. So I think they basically looked at a map and determined that a midway point between New York and then Texas was in my area. So I remember coming home, and this was the day when answering machines were separate from your telephone, it wasn't built into your phone. And I forget what I was doing, but I pressed a button, looking in the refrigerator, and there's a message from John Dirth. Howard, Marc Johnson is in town. He wants to get together. See you later. Bye. And so I'm thinking, there's a drummer named Marc Johnson. There's also, it can't be the bass player. Why is Marc Johnson in here in Southeast Virginia? So I called Dirth back and I said, man, are you talking about the bass player? And he says, yeah. He and his family moved, and he would like to get together and do a jam session. I said, well, count me in. And so I remember he lived in an area that I was not familiar with. This was around Christmas. And he invited me and Dirth to come out and to play. And they had a Christmas party earlier at their house. And, as is my habit, I got lost. And I'm like fumbling around, scuffling, trying to find his place, And so eventually, I think I showed up sometime around 11. It could have been midnight. It was at night. And so we're all at my van, Dirth and Mark. And so we're talking and looking at the stars. And so Mark says, well, you still want to play? I said, yeah. So I moved my stuff in. And so it was just trumpet, bass, and drums.
Oh, beautiful.
Man, it was so nice to play with this guy. What I did not know was that Mark was recording the whole session. And at the time, Mark was at ECM, your Bass Desires. Mark was at ECM, and this was before he made the move, I think, to Verve.
Yeah.
And he had pitched the idea of that trumpet trio to Manfred Eicher.
Oh, really?
But then, yeah, so it's like somewhere in the vaults right now in Munich, But then he moved to Verve, and he didn't move on it. But that was basically it. And then Dirth knew John Abercrombie from John Dirth's early days in New York, which was like a heyday from what he tells me. Michael Brecker was just getting started. Moses was around. And, I think Eddie Gomez, and then Abercrombie, and all the guys we know, like from the 80s.
Yeah.
But so he had this idea to put a quartet together with Abercrombie. And I thought, man, I'm totally in, So we did it. We did a rehearsal. The rehearsal was just like magic, and we did that record. And ironically, during that date, John's mother passed away halfway through, and I noticed how the music got stronger, like near the end of the date. And I'm going, wow, where is this coming from? And then he basically said, what had happened. And I said, man, why didn't you share that? He goes, no, I didn't want anything to affect the music. So we did it. And John Dirth had a loft. This was like when the loft scene was happening. And his next door neighbor was a guy who ended up being my teacher, Warren Smith.
Oh, really? Oh, I love Warren, man. Yeah.
John was in 150. Warren was in 151. And check this out. At the end of the set, because basically we drove up, to do the session. And I was at the session. I mean, I gave everything I had, and I just needed to crash. And so John said, hey, you want to come over and meet my neighbor? And I said, man, I think I'm just going to go to bed. And then the next morning we had breakfast, and I said, well, who is your neighbor? And he said, Warren Smith. Why didn't you tell me that? So but then that, ended up meeting Warren, and then we had a connection, and I studied with Warren for a few years, couple of years. And yeah, he just became he was the next step after Andrew White. Andrew was very important to me, but Warren, as a drummer and a percussionist, was doing exactly what I wanted to do, somewhere in between, doing Broadway shows, and he was playing a lot of freer music, creative music, but he was also teaching, and he was playing with mainstream jazz guys. I mean, and he was doing everything on such a high level, and that was the mark to shoot for, So yeah, we immediately hooked up.
Yeah, such a player, man. Both of these guys, Andrew and Warren, so underrated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Musicians, like, of course, they're known in the musician world, but I think wider, they should be more known. But yeah,
absolutely. I'm still surprised to this day I can mention Andrew's name to a saxophone player, and they just look at me like I'm speaking German to them. Like, what? Who is that? And then I explain who it is, and then it's I really need to find out more. I need to get some of his recordings. I mean, Andrew recorded over 50 records in his own company under his own name. I mean, that's such a mark.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned two drummers, Danny Richmond or even Paul Motion. I remember on one workshop to older drummers, I was like, Paul Motion, people like, who? I was like, what? What do you listen to? Like Marcus Gilmore? Well, that's good, but come on, back. There's like a whole bunch of players who Jeff Ballard and Marcus listen to, so check them out first. And I mean, obviously, or
exactly
do your homework.
Exactly, because you can be sure Marcus knows who Paul Motion is.
Of course.
Without saying,
Yeah. But with John, you played a lot, right? Because then you played also with that record with Mulgrew Miller, and Mike Richmond was on bass.
That's right. Yeah.
How was Mulgrew like to play with?
Oh man, here's the Mulgrew story. It was fantastic. And in the studio, I was like looking right at Mulgrew the whole time, the whole time. And he's such a gentle giant, just like, and so supportive to the music. And I told him afterwards, I said, man, it was just really a pleasure. And he goes, no, man, it's you. But he was such a pleasure to play with. Everybody was. Mike Richmond, who I ended up playing again with in Turkey. He was a part of this project that I did with, it was a project that a composer that I knew in Richmond, Virginia. He wrote this suite for 3 improvising percussionists and symphony orchestra. And Mike was on it, as well as Dirth was on it, and some other people, and that was fantastic. But from the recording with Dirth, we did that. He had secured 2 days for doing the recording. And so after the first day, we went through everything. So after the first day, we had dinner at this Japanese restaurant. We were all sitting on the floor. And I whispered over to John, I said, listen, man, how do you think it went? And he whispered to me, he says, you know what? I already have my record. We're going to go in tomorrow. Maybe we'll do a couple of horn lines, repass. He says, but basically you're done. He says, we're going to do a few things. So we were in the studio for maybe 2 hours, and then we set back out for Virginia. But like I said, it just went down so smoothly. It was like, I mean, that was Mulgrew's first time seeing that music for the rehearsal, and he played it like it was his session, It was just fantastic. But with Ingrid, a few years later, I was playing the festival in Den Haag, North Sea Jazz. And so again, by the time we got finished playing, they had closed down the kitchen for the musicians. So I told the guy, I said, look, I've got to have some food. He goes, well, if you can walk it, it's about a 25-minute walk. There's a great Chinese restaurant. So I walked to this restaurant, and I was the only one there in the corner reading and eating. And so I heard this really Southern voice saying, pass on the Mugu guy pan. And I looked up, and it was Benny Wallace.
Oh, wow, man. That's cool.
Who I had played with in quintet with John Dirth.
Oh, well, really? Oh, man.
And this was like a lot of years. I mean, several years had passed, and Benny Wallace had this. He was writing for this show on HBO. He was writing the music weekly series. And so I went over. I was going to go over, and I thought, nah, he's not going to remember me. That was such a long time ago. So eventually, I went over, and I said, Benny, excuse me, but you probably don't remember me, but we played in Charlottesville, Virginia, University of Virginia with John Dirth. And he goes, Howard Curtis. And I was surprised, man. And he's like a string bean, man. He picked me up like 6 inches off the ground, big hug, a big Tennessee hug. And he goes, what are you doing over here? And I said, yeah, I'm playing North Sea. And so he goes, why don't you sit down with us? And at the table was Mulgrew Miller.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he also remembered the session, you know,
beautiful.
and it was just so nice to reconnect. So them running out of food at the cafeteria was such a treasure for me because I got to reconnect with these guys, you know.
Yeah. Amazing.
But, and, you know, Benny, I had to ask him about that record. I said, man, that record you did, Big Jim Does the Tango, which is like Elvin, Dave Holland, and Benny. And I said, can you just like talk about that experience? And he says, he laughed at me. He goes, yeah, he said, everything basically went down in one take. And he said, Big Jim Does the Tango was the last one. And I basically told everybody what I wanted. And I said, can we just do it? It's like AABA form. You know, the first part is tango and the bridge is swing and then back. And then once you understand that, you understand why he got Elvin for it, because the tango really is kind of a pull back kind of a group. Yeah. So he says, yeah, let's just do it. So he said that he was in the room and he goes, he slated it. Big Jim Does the Tango, take one. 1, 2, 1, 2. And before he got the 3, 4, on the intercom, you heard coming from the drum booth, what's a tango? Okay, cut. So they had to explain to him what a tango was. And when you hear it, it's like the heaviest tango you ever heard in your life. But I mean, he was like perfect for that, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, Elvin was perfect for the tango.
Yeah.
If he had gone to Argentina, he probably would have been like the #1 cat for tango drums. You know?
Imagine him playing with Astor or someone like that. Yes. That would have been a sight, actually. Like I don't see it, but I do see it at the same time.
Yeah, right. You can kind of see it. You know?
That's quite a cool story, man. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
But he asked me,
amazing.
You know, he goes, would you be available to come up and do like drums for like one of my TV series? I said, yeah. And he gave me a date. And of course, this is the story of my life. HBO canceled the series. So I never got a chance to do it, but it was great just to be asked, you know, just for him to ask him. And I have no idea what he's doing now. Where are you? I haven't heard that.
Also, I was trying to search for him the other day because I have him on so many records, but I cannot find his contacts or anything. But yeah, he's one of the, you know, again, one of those really underrated players, you know, such a sound and everything.
Yeah. And you ask yourself, what? I mean, he had that like big old Coleman Hawkins sound, but all this modern expression and modern I mean, he was just beautiful, you know. His playing was just amazing. Yeah.
Like those records in the 80s, I think with Scofield, he did like 2 or 3, and you know, like really, really beautiful stuff. And amazing player.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Otherwise, Howard, I just also, you know, you mentioned George Colligan before, and for all the younger viewers will know, you know, on those records are Mark Turner and Kurt Rosenwinkel and all this cohort of younger new players that were upcoming then. And at the same time, you before recorded with Gary Thomas. Like, I love those records where George is also on it.
Yeah.
How was it like playing with those guys? And how did you meet Gary, by the way? You know, he's been in the 90s and 2000s, like, you know, the player, I think. And
yeah. Also an interesting story. I don't know if you remember this or not, but it was right around the time of the O.J. Simpson getaway.
Oh, yeah,
when
yeah,
he
sure.
was escaping, that whole thing. So I went up. A great friend of mine, great bass player. As a matter of fact, I just played with him when I was home. Jimmy Masters, great player. He was driving. We were both driving to this gig in Baltimore, which is where Gary actually is living right now. He's from Baltimore, and we were driving to a gig that Jimmy got with this piano player, Fred Buddha, who's I think in D.C. now. And so we were playing, and he told me at the time, he says, Gary might come out because they had played together. Gary came down and they played with another drummer. And he said, Gary may come out. So basically it was the whole gig we played, and I'm looking at the door every 10 minutes, no Gary. And sure enough, the last tune he comes in. And so he comes up, he had his horn, he comes up and he played, and it was great, And he remembered that. And so he called me a couple of years later because Gary was in charge of the jazz studies department at Peabody, which is part of Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Yeah. And he called me to do that. So I was working for him. He was my boss. And I did that. And it was during that time that we did that record.
Sorted Street, yeah.
Uh-huh. And Colligan also is from Maryland, close to Baltimore. So, and also Paul Bollenbeck is from the area. So it's basically all native guys who had gone to New York. Gary, I think, floated around New York for a while, but he came back to Baltimore. Yeah. Kind of like Warren Wolf, the vibraphone player. I think he was in for a minute, but he's now living in Baltimore again. And which is very, very comfortable. I mean, it's only like, I don't know, about maybe 2.5, 3 hours, New York straight interstate. Yeah. So it's very comfortable to be in Baltimore and go back and forth. But that was my beginnings with Gary. He was my boss. And also that's when I first met Mike Formanek. Formanek was teaching there, Ingrid Jensen.
Oh, he was in Baltimore. Exactly.
Yeah. And it was weird because, I mean, everybody was like teaching there and everybody was a performing musician. So the only time we saw each other was like at exam time, the rest of the year. I never saw anybody, Gary was the only one I saw, and he was a true treasure to be there. I remember once I was on my way out the door leaving, and one of my students was sitting in the hallway of the practice room with his cymbal bag and his head was down. And I was talking to Gary. And so Gary says, yeah, what's wrong? He goes, yeah, I was supposed to do a session and everybody canceled on me at the last minute. And Gary said, well, I'm here right now. Let's just play duo. So the student got to play 2 hours of duo with Gary Thomas. I mean, how many times does that happen,
Yeah.
And the student was, man, he was just beaming the next week. I said, so how was it? He goes, oh, man, it was great. It was great.
Yeah, come on. Probably these are the moments to remember, right? Like
Yeah. And the student, you may be familiar with him, Devin Gray.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That was the student.
Really? Oh, come on. Really?
Yeah, Devin was my student at Peabody. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah, we've been talking with Devin to do a project together for a long time now, but we just the schedules we don't get together.
Yeah.
Oh, really? What a small world. Damn.
Yeah.
Amazing, man. Well, speaking of teaching, I wanted to ask you, how was your transition to Graz and your view? It's a big one, and at least you have, pumpkin seed oil here, which is the ingredient of life. But and your view on the European scene, like how did you get integrated and this whole story?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I was over here. I had come to Austria specifically, like 3, maybe 4 times, just different times, playing music, coming by, and I was playing all through Austria. Never got to Slovenia. But I was playing all over Austria. And I remember the last time I was there, I actually was thinking as I was looking at the moor, I was thinking, man, I wonder what it would be like to actually live here. And then 6 months later, I found out, because of that, my gig, I found out that they were looking for a drum professor because the original guy had been there for 40 years. So while I was there, I met vocalist Lori Antonioli, who's now in San Francisco. And so I thought that she was just on tour like all of us, and she just came out to hear the band. And she says, no, I live in Graz. I said, well, what are you doing here? She goes, I teach at this jazz university. And I said, wait a minute, hold on. What do you mean jazz university? She goes, the university, here, the Jazz Institute. And so I, asked, and she confirmed that they had a drum professor there who was leaving. And she said, man, you teach in the States. Why don't you consider auditioning for the job? And I hemmed and hawed. No, I'm kind of set up already in the States, and I don't know about leaving and doing that. But the more I traveled on that tour, the more I thought about, wow, I've always wanted to just teach at one school, because in the States, we don't have that kind of position. If you're the chief of the department,
Yeah.
they'll hire you full time. But most of the people that play our instruments, guitar, drums, bass, we're what they call adjunct professors, part time, and you only get paid according to how many students you have. And after Christmas in the States, like from like the 21st of December until like January 15th, you're not working, which means you're not getting paid. And also from the end of May until the first week of September, you're not getting paid.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to be in a full-time position at one school, and this was that opportunity. And I thought, man, you just gonna have to go for it. And so, I sent in everything and all my information, and I remember this was in November. December, I went to San Francisco just to have Christmas with some friends of mine out there. And I hadn't checked my email in a few weeks. So we're walking down the street, and we passed an internet cafe, and I said, man, let me just check my email. I haven't checked it in a while. And I went in, and here was a letter from Graz saying, congratulations, you're in the top 6. We invite you to come back in April. So it all worked out for me. I was able to do it. So they for this long period of time, I didn't know whether I had the job or not. And I said, when will you let me know? They said, 10 days to 2 weeks. Well, this was in April. I didn't find out that I had the job until the end of August. And at that point, I was teaching adjunct at 4 schools, and they were all sending me new contracts for the semester. Yeah. And I didn't tell anybody that I had auditioned. So I kept holding them off. And I'm getting phone calls from secretaries, Howard, this is such and such at William & Mary. We sent you a contract. And I said, I forgot it, I'll send it. Yeah, but, school starts next week. We really need to have that. So I remember thinking, well, I guess I didn't get the job. And I remember I was like really depressed. And I had just handed in the last of all the letters saying that I would come in, and I signed the contracts. Sure enough, as I'm going back to my apartment, my phone rings, and it was Ed Neumeister. And Ed says, Howard, this is Ed Neumeister from the university. I was on the drum commission, and I'm telling you that, you came in close. It was a close battle, but you won the drum professorship. Can you come over and negotiate and sign the contract? And I said, yeah. When do you need me? Can you come next week? I said, yeah, you come next week. So I went on over, got excused from all my schools. I went over, signed the contract. And when everything was done, I said, so when do I start? And the rector said, you start in October. And I said, oh, you mean a year from now? He says, no, I mean in 3.5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
I said, well, I've got to get out of my apartment. I've got to sell my car. There's no way that I can get here in 3.5 weeks. So he said, well, can you start the second semester in March? I said, that gives me 6 months. Yeah, I can do that. So when I came over, the first day I taught, now that I can answer your question finally.
No, come on.
The first week I was there, I sat down, and each of the students comes in with like a book the size of a Manhattan phone book, loaded with transcriptions and stuff that they'd done. And None of my students ever did that for me, like in the States. That not to that degree, not to that degree, and not that consistently. I mean, everybody that came in there that day had this book, and so it was all the same thing. I would listen to these guys rip off Philly Joe transcriptions and Tony Williams, and somebody also had Jeff Ballard and Adam Nussbaum. And so there was a piano in my office, and I said, okay, so let me just play some comping on the piano, and you play with me. And now the red flags were starting to show up, you know. They had spent a lot of time with these things. So that, for me, was the marked difference between teaching in the States and teaching here. Like in the States, oops, there's a little head peeking in. Hi. Bye-bye. His mom just got him. That, for me, was the marked difference between teaching in the States and teaching in Europe. For me, it seems to me that in the States, the technique really comes out of the music. You know, students get involved with music, and overall they figure out what they need to do in order to play the music. Whereas here, the music comes out of the technique.
Yeah.
You know, a guy will like rip off of, 11 against 3, and they'll come in and they'll play it for me. And I say, yeah, that sounds great. Now, could you play a blues? It can be even 8th note blues, or it can be a swing blues, whatever. Now, can you apply that to the music? Well,
exactly. Yep.
That's the problem, you know? And I said, man, it's great that you figured this thing out, but eventually you're going to have to play this with some people, unless you want a career as a solo drummer, like it's just you playing drums and you just, like Max did, and several guys. But that was the mark. Technique out of the music versus music out of the technique. So once I came to grips with that, and I redid my whole syllabus, and everything was cool. I mean, they could understand me, I could understand them, and then business was conducted.
No, I completely get you. Like, I have so many friends, drummers, who, playing 7 in quadruplets over 11, whatever, cross 13 on a blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, that sounds cool, man. Okay, let's play something now. Like, and of course they don't play that, because how can you just force that in, unless it's really natural. But it's funny, that you mentioned this, because so many people are like that, drummers especially.
Yeah, but I don't want you to get me wrong. I think it's great. I was talking to Billy Drummond about this. We were like best friends. We've known each other for years, and we were just talking about. He went out to hear Marcus Gilmore, and he took with him Jabali Billy Hart and also Kenny Washington. And Jabali told Billy, he said, I think that Marcus is the greatest jazz drummer playing today. And on the other side of the coin, Kenny Washington hated every note. He said,
of course, it's not good.
I hate it. And Billy says, well, why do you hate it? He goes, yeah, well, he needs to really like work on his hands, and like Marcus has unbelievable technique, but it was really the style of music. Kenny feels, and he's earned the right to have this opinion, certainly he's Kenny Washington. He thinks that if it doesn't come out of Philly Joe, then it's really not happening, But in response to what you just asked, I think that it's just amazing, what guys are coming up with, like the Chris Daves and Tane and all these guys coming up with all of these things. And I mean, you have to sort of expect that with art, that's really the boat that you have to get on. But I mean, innovation really is just going to go on, whether you're on the boat or not. Innovation is going to go on. So it's, I mean, I don't really agree with everything that has come out, but I mean, that's neither here nor there. I mean, it's going to come out. It's the stuff is going to happen. So some of the stuff I'm really on board with. I really love what guys are doing. And then some of it, question marks come up. Well, why are you doing that? This.
Well, it's a matter of taste also in the end, right?
Exactly.
Some people like pistachio ice cream, some don't. So it's like,
right.
They're both right. And we're all, it's that's how it is. Yeah, that's the
That's
beauty.
it. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Howard, since I hear you're getting busy there, like, uh, what, just not to take more of your time, like, what's still on the schedule for you for this year? Do you have some upcoming gigs or projects? What's happening on that department?
I got some things, and you know, since I'm in pension from the school now, I'm basically, people ask me, you know, how is it being in pension? And I said, yeah, it's even more busy because, you know, my wife is a school teacher, and she's very, very, very good. I have to give her kudos. She's very good, like, you know, making the time for me to go out and play gigs and do stuff like that. And I'm forever grateful about that. But if I'm not playing a gig, you know, I mean, I get all my practicing done at night in the far corner when everybody's asleep. Then I can read what I want to read. I can play. I can listen to what I want to listen to. Everything goes on after midnight. But in terms of me, I've got some commitments. Wayne Darling has a trio that I do. I'm doing some stuff with him already down. I'm already, like, I was really inspired with my concert based on Percival Everett. And I think that the next one that I may try is Faulkner.
Ooh, okay.
So, you know, I'm revisiting Go Down Moses and Absalom. And something may come out of that. I also want to do another solo percussion project. I did one in Turkey. I had a Turkish American student who left New York and came back to Turkey to start this jazz school. And he invited me to come. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? He says, yeah, do whatever you want to do. And I said, well, how about if I did a solo percussion project? He goes, yeah, do it. So I did it on the music of Duke Ellington.
Oh, wow.
And I brought in, I did Things Ain't What They Used to Be, blues. I did it on four timpani with my student playing African drum.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
And then I did another thing, but it was me sitting down playing marimba. And under the marimba, my right foot was playing bass drum, and my left foot had like two African shakers on it. So I did that, and then I switched and turned around and played like a solo on like timbales and cymbals. I did Single Petal of a Rose, piano transcription. I did four mallets on vibraphone, and then I did It Don't Mean a not It Don't Mean a Thing, but Take the A Train, Take the Coal Train, Take the A Train, Take the A Train.
Yeah.
I did it on solo drums. But I didn't want to just play. For this, I didn't want to just play drums. Like I said, I'm classically trained, and let's face it, I spend an awful lot of my parents' money learning how to play these instruments. So once in a while, I should play them in homage to my parents. You know, so it went over really well, and I'm thinking about. I have like lots of percussion music I did that I would like to really do further expression, and also. The music of Weston, Randy Weston. I really love the way that he plays. A lot of his stuff is really a heavy African influence, and he's done some things with African drummers I really love. So I think that the next solo drum presentation, I've already started writing on it, solo percussion presentation, is going to feature my work and also some Randy Weston stuff. Beautiful. And there's a couple of like art galleries in Graz who've already expressed an interest. Like, as soon as you get it done, call us and you can do it. So I got a venue. I got to figure out how to get the instruments into the venue. And so that's immediately what's on my plate right now. You know?
Fantastic. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Sir.
And hopefully we'll do something.
Oh man, we have to play, yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like we live so close, but we never get to do it. At least meet for dinner or a glass of wine or something. So.
Yeah, it would be great, you know.
Yeah.
We'll take the kids to the park and watch them together.
Yeah, I'll tell my wife to take a holiday, and it's like, we're just gonna hang with Howard, okay?
I think it's overdue.
Yeah, man. Howard, thanks so much again for finding the time.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
And hope to see you soon, man.
Absolutely, man. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.